I'd like to welcome Jeff Booth, the author of The Price of Tomorrow. In German, it's Der Preis der Zukunft. And that's the reason why we are sitting here today. Hello, Jeff.
Hi, Nico. Nice to meet you.
Thank you very much for taking the time.
Yeah, no problem at all.
You wrote this book in 2019, right?
That's right.
And it was published shortly before we had the whole Corona thing, the crisis going on.
Exactly. It published, I think, January 20th, 2020.
It says why deflation might be the key to an abundant future.
Yep.
And now deflation and inflation, that's a very hotly debated topic everywhere around the world, but especially in Germany and Austria. People hate inflation here. We had the hyperinflation in the 1920s, and it's still, the families know about it, the institutions know about it. Right now, the inflation rates are going up, and you're talking about deflation. Something doesn't add up. And that's why your book is so interesting, because you have a thesis that's different. What do we see right now? Why do we see inflation, but why should we talk about deflation?
So, yeah, and we live in a world that's designed for inflation. And so our entire system is designed for, call it 2% inflation. And and I don't know if you've heard the saying, when a measurement becomes an objective, it ceases to be valuable as a measurement tool. And so we have 2% inflation that is designed, and central banks around the world are trying to meet that. And if you investigate that a little deeper, why do we want inflation? So you'd say, inflation is just when your money is worth less each year. So we have a policy around the world, designed around the world, that we should have our money worth less each year. And we believe that that's required for a productive society.
But why do we believe that? What's the reasons?
Because we were conditioned into believing it. Hyperinflation is bad, but inflation at 2% is good. And so combined with recency bias, we didn't live through, at least in the Western world, we haven't lived through a hyperinflation event since when you talk about Germany and on Austria and what happened to lead up to World War II and everything else. We haven't lived through a hyperinflationary event, so we just trust that the central bankers know what they're doing and drive a 2% inflation rate, which was really theft, right? So I steal your money. It's a hidden tax, which arbitrarily takes from the middle class and poor and gives to the rich, because the rich have assets that go up with inflation, and inflation, the opposite side of inflation, is wage deflation or savings deflation. So it's one and the same thing. So your income or your savings rate is going down.
So when the German and the Austrian savers, are mad at Christine Lagarde, they have a right to do so? To be like that?
We're going to get into this. They have a major right to do so. It's way worse than they probably even realize. And we'll investigate some of that here too. So on one side, we live in a system where we have been led to believe that our money must be worth less each year to live in a productive society. But 2% is okay. So theft at 2% is okay, but if it went to theft at 5%, that's a bad thing. So, but when you investigate that, you'd say, is that true? Right, so it has been true, and we live in that society. But what's happening is you have a bigger force moving the other way. So technology creates efficiency, and and technology is moving exponentially into every single industry at blinding speed. It's almost incomprehensible how fast that's moving, and that means that efficiency is exponentially deflationary. So technology moves one way. So you have two different systems moving the exact opposite way. One system essentially requiring deflation to allow the abundance gained from technology gains to be able to be broadly shared. It's a requirement of where we're going in the digital age. And a system that we've lived in all of our life, that we measure everything by, moving the opposite way. And they're moving faster and faster away from each other. And so some simple examples. In GDP, 20 years ago, you would have seen, in part of the GDP measure, you would have seen photography. And think about the entire industry based on photography, editing, film distribution, film driving back and forth to the stores, all the stores to require film distribution and buying and selling film to be able to take a small amount of pictures. And Kodak was the king of that, and they invented the digital camera. Today, all of that is gone, yet we have an abundance in photography, and that abundance is free. We take more and more photos. All the editing software is available on our phones, and we have unlimited photos. We use way more photos, and it's completely free. And so where does that, as an example, show up in positive GDP? So that productivity that's happening everywhere is actually negative GDP. So it's moving one way. So now
but hasn't that always been the case, that technology is deflationary?
So yes, but if you look at cycles and why everybody can feel something's wrong, but they can't put their finger on it. Technology never moved as fast as it's moving today. So I use the example in the book, and they have folding a piece of paper on itself and folding a piece, kind of an exponential pattern. So if you fold a piece of paper on itself, a normal 8.5 piece by 11 piece of paper, if you could continue folding it past 7 folds and continue folding it for 50 times, how thick would that piece of paper be? And the piece of paper would be from here to the sun. And I've asked that question to tens of thousands of people in live audiences and everything else. And 99.9% of the people guess about 2 inches. Mm-hmm. And what that says, if 50% of the people got the answer, and then I think the human condition would say, okay, we're okay because we understand exponential patterns. But because nobody gets the answer, including me, and that everybody thinks they can get the answer once they know the answer, but it says human beings are really bad at exponential patterns. Yet we have an exponential pattern on Moore's law and technology moving at that rate. And where are we on, if you compare that analogy of folding piece of paper to the sun to today on technology, we're on fold 33 moving to fold 34. So that means the steep steps, everything in technology over the last 50 years likely doubles in the next 2 years. So when we look forward, we can't grasp the rate of change. The rate of change isn't just speeding up. The rate of change is exponential. Now let me just connect that to what we were talking about. In the world we formerly lived in, inflation was still a theft. But it was managed because technology wasn't moving as fast. And so you had these 80 or 100 years debt cycles that created these big debt bubbles that had to be reset. And they were typically reset through war, revolution, and war. And then you start it again. Today we live in a different world, and it's moving, and technology is moving faster and faster the other way. So it's happening at a rate we can't even comprehend, breaking the system at a rate we can't comprehend. So if you connect those things, I think what's happened is 30 years ago, your actual natural rate of disinflation based on technology would have been negative 1%. And all over the world, you've had central bankers lowering interest rates, trying to get the target up to 2% and constantly missing. Constantly missing the 2%. Mm-hmm. And everybody around the world is measuring off zero when it was negative 1%. And why they're missing is it's going faster the other way. That was 30 years ago. Today, the actual negative rate through technology gain might be negative 5% per year.
How could you know that?
I'm extrapolating what's happening underneath from what's happening in technology. I can't know that from a data because the data is messy, because we're looking at data through an inflationary system and printing money to make inflation happen no matter what cost. And the cost of that, why people are talking about, okay, we get inflation, temporary inflation, and then it falls back down, is because that money printing is distorting every price signal in the world. And the real and the inflation deflation debate is kind of a red herring. What's really happening is, and so policymakers say, keep on printing staggering amounts of money to drive inflation, and then they say we have more room because inflation rates can't keep up, so we're not hitting our rates, so we need more printing to be able to cause it. But what's happening is that that society is breaking because of that. You're essentially concentrating all wealth and power into very few hands, and technology is moving the other way. And just this simple example, if you think about any rational actor, I own a whole bunch of technology companies. What would I do if it's costing more and more through labor because of monetary easing? Wouldn't I use technology to be able to give more value faster and remove labor faster?
So the inflation is actually accelerating the whole process.
Exactly. So you have two different systems reinforcing the exact opposite way.
You just alluded to the fact, so you're an author of the book, but you're not an economist. You're not like an author who has written 12 books. You're an entrepreneur. Can you tell us a bit about yourself, where you came from as an entrepreneur, and also how did you come to the epiphany about the deflation?
So what I'd say, I'm curious. I've always been curious, and I'd say what drove that curiosity was an accountability. I wanted to create a better place in the world for me and for every business as an entrepreneur. Essentially, what you do is say, how can I provide more value? I see a structure that's broken, and if you provide more value to people, you can create a whole bunch of wealth for yourself by providing more value to other people. It's actually the only way entrepreneurs win, because if you don't provide more value, and it's a hard thing to do because you're dealing in a really competitive world with monopoly power and everything else, and to create that, you have to find enough value to break free of a monopoly and everything else to benefit society to actually win. And so that when you think about that process, which that's what I do in a whole bunch of different businesses, that process must be, especially with technology, assuming that every rational actor is only voting for your goods or services because they're trying to get more for less. That process in a free market must give more for less. It must be deflationary. And so I couldn't understand my first business was it took, I can't remember the exact number, but between $5 and $6 million and about 60 developers over 2 years to develop the technology 20 years ago that today is available for essentially free. Every entrepreneur can just plug into $50 a month or a SaaS model that gives actually better technology, that it took all of that to build on top of a SaaS model for $50 a month through Shopify or something, or Amazon, and it's moving faster and faster. So if you just think about all of that labor to do my one company, replicated times thousands, hundreds of thousands of different companies to where it is today, you'd think, why aren't prices coming down everywhere? Right? We see in our phones we get more for less. Every app we use, we get more for less. If you look at your phone at the amount of things that it's moved out of cost to now abundance, it's why we use our phones. It's why we sell it. It's actually why we create every monopoly power, because they give us more for less. And I couldn't understand why that wasn't translating into lower prices everywhere. And so it was bugging me. It was really bugging me. It was something I was talking about for years and years. So being curious, I wanted to learn every single thing about why. And I would say, as an entrepreneur, I didn't have a bias to how the system had to run. I was more curious, just like I wanted to, what could it look like? and what must it look like for the digital world we're moving into. And that led me onto an experience. You said something, I think it's important. I didn't want to write the book. I actually, for years, if you talk to my wife and everything else, or friends around, this is something I was talking about for 10 years, and I did not want to write a book. But I could not believe that nobody could put the pieces together. You had these technology utopians driving one way and talking about how more and more wealth, and you had a financial system moving the exact opposite way, and every single measurement in our world driven by kind of that juxtaposition of two different systems operating. And I just got mad. I looked forward and I saw the world that my kids would grow up in would be a really dangerous world if somebody didn't do something. So that's why I wrote the book.
Where do we stand right now, in your opinion? You said it's because if we think about this, it's a bit like exponential growth. In the afterwards, we do see it, like with the iPhone, right? The iPhone is 12 years old, but we use it 5 to 6 hours a day, which is crazy. We use it for everything. Where do you see technology moving next? Where do you see? Is it everywhere? Is it in specific sectors that we should look to?
So why this is so confusing for people is they're measuring their reality through a system that is manipulating their reality. And so you walk away and you believe, okay, well, my house price could go up and up forever, yet I vote every day for other things to come down in price. I vote with my wallet. So every rational actor is choosing to get more for less. With that alone, right, every rational actor worldwide, and I mean by rational actor, I mean you and me, and every single person listening to this podcast, you don't get a vote with your money to get less for more. You vote with your money and your time to get more for less. That's why you use an iPhone. That's why you use Google. That's why you use Amazon. That's why you're constantly voting with that. How is it possible that with that being true, that you could also believe in a system that has to work the other way?
Well, has it ever worked?
So it does for time periods. So why? And these are complicated topics, but it almost require rewiring your brain. And people push back from that because they're so entrenched in a system. So some of the hard data from the book. Over the last 20 years, so today in the world, actually, take last year because now the number's way higher. But there was over $250 trillion of global debt to support a global economy of $80 trillion. And if you and realize that if you have that much debt and you have to pay that debt back, then growth has to slow in the future, because your tax rate has to go up to pay that debt, or new economy or new growth opportunities have to be huge to be able to offset that growth rate. So as the debt goes up that high, it becomes a burden on future growth because the rate of interest has to go to cover that debt just alone. But then when you investigate that, and that sounds like an alarmingly high number, but when you actually look deeper at that number, 185 trillion of that 250 came over the last 20 years. As you would expect, if technology was moving one way and you had to keep in stasis going the other way. And so now where are we? So now what you can expect is technology is still moving this way. Every single company needs to remove labor faster, and they have more and more tools to be able to do that. And debt is exploding. That's why that's why it was easy to predict from a system standpoint what the next steps, if you were going through the book, all the next steps that would happen logically. It almost gives you a cheat code for where the world's going, and the debt has to grow higher and higher and higher and be monetized because there's no way to pay it back. It's just math. There's no way to pay it back.
But the central bankers, the politicians, do they know that?
So, okay, and this is why these are these are really hard concepts because we live in this system, we measure everything else. You use the $185 trillion. Everybody thinks their house always goes up in value. And they've never asked the question, would my house go up in value without $185 trillion of stimulus over the last 20 years? The answer is simply no. Houses would go down in value or stay constant. The value has gone up because you're destroying monetary value, and assets are trying to hold some of that value as you're monetizing into that. So do bankers know about this? Now, first, I suspect not. I suspect most people on the planet don't know what we're talking about right now. I wish they did. That's why I wrote the book, and the book's been crazy adopted. So a lot of people are starting to wake up to this concept. But imagine you were a central banker, given the options that we just said. What would you do? Because the existing system based on credit, because there's nothing backing it. There's not gold backing it. There's nothing backing it. It's a system based on debt. It's a system based on credit. And if you allow deflation into a credit-based system, the system keeps unwinding, and it keeps on unwinding because I owe you money, you owe somebody else money, and we all think that money is real. And
we would have debt deflation before we get to the actual deflation.
So that's the problem. You would have every asset around the world, and every government would fail, every bank would fail, as you repriced everything in an instant. And as soon as that deflation started to happen, as soon as the real market started to happen, why governments are trying to fight deflation at all costs is because it would unwind the entire world to the sand. But they don't realize that the consequence, the opposite consequences of trying to inflate send us through a path of either central control of everything, which looks like totalitarianism. It's a horrific human future. So where you have a small number of people in control of everything with artificial intelligence and robotics, that is the path we're on right now.
That sounds like China.
Yeah, but worse. China. It sounds like China, but if you actually keep going with how much control is consolidated as a result of that, and how much less labor is needed, it looks like China on steroids. That is, and if you believe that one human or a couple of humans should have domain over all other humans, without realization that they will change their mind, absolute power crops, absolutely. You have humanity destined for a really dystopian future. So that is one alternative. That is the path that we're on. That's what it looks like. Along that path, you also have path two, which is revolution and war. People start waking up to this. And that path creates a geopolitical risks all over the world. And just ask this kind of on China. 2013, China stopped buying bonds in the US, as the government bonds. Before that, essentially China was giving vendor financing, keeping interest rates low in the US, so consumers would buy more Chinese goods. Then China realized, okay, US won't pay back their debts. So we got to stop buying those bonds. And what would China invest in? They would invest in rare earth minerals and everything else. And so they would take up natural pieces of the ecosystem that are where we're going for a digital transition. When that happens, you get politicians realizing there's a huge geopolitical risk here, and creating kind of war machines to be able to. It's their fault that your problem looks like this. And by the way, when you talk about Germany and Austria, we've seen these patterns repeat throughout history. It's pretty simple. The first thing you do is you control your population through fear, and you say it's those people, because people will believe it. And when concentration of wealth gets as high as it's getting, more of the population votes for people that believe that. They'll believe in more printing. They'll believe in if I get, so I don't have food, my housing prices keep going up, and they don't realize that the government is actually creating those housing prices and food prices to go up. And they vote for governments who will give them more, redistribute that by doing the same thing.
And the printing and the inflation is responsible for the concentration of wealth at the top, right?
It's responsible for it. And what ends up happening is, but it creates an us versus them mentality, because a lot of the people are left out of that. And that's the populace. And those people vote for a different person in control, but versus this on the same system, to be able to help them, because they don't understand what we're talking about at the root cause of it all. So they vote, kind of the system carries forward, they vote for the same system to drive more inflation, to be able to give them some of the money, which further concentrates the wealth and power. And that's the system that we're in today. And it's pretty logical why people do that.
There's one problem. Inflation is easy.
Well,
why should we not go that path, it's, as a society? Because it is the easy way.
So that's the problem. We don't think about and that's why politicians don't think about it too. So you're not going to get elected. No one right now would get elected saying we're going to cause a deflationary debt collapse, and everything's going to reprice, and every hospital will shut down, every bank will shut down, everybody's going to lose their money, and we're going to reset. And don't worry, it'll be a happy future. Good luck. Right.
We tried a little bit of that in austerity, in the Euro crisis, in the 2010s.
But again, because I said the unwind would wind to the sand, as soon as that austerity, and that's when the taper tantrum was the same thing.
Yeah.
All of these things are the same. They're the same thing. There is no possible mathematical way out of the existing system that allows deflation to be able to happen without a complete reset. And there's no way a politician could get elected in that system to be able to allow that. That system is, we don't realize it, it's already over. But the consequences on humanity, our time, our labor, essentially, if you think about, we spend 40 years of our life trying to accumulate enough money and working on our time and everything else to try to live the last number of years of our life in relative safety. And on a keystroke, that can be taken from you.
And now it is. It is been taken every day.
Every day on a keystroke. It's taken from you. Essentially, it's theft at the highest order on a keystroke. So it has not. So, but again, we're measuring our world and every other economic calculation from that world, believing it to be true. And when technology is moving exactly the other way.
But where does the money end up? I mean, who steals it?
So if governments had to be truthful to you, most of their revenue comes through inflation. If they had to be truthful with you on what taxes you would have to pay to run society and everything else, then essentially moving the theft to above the line, to truth, government would have to get smaller. Government would have to be more nimble, and they would have to listen to voters who determine. It would be a true democracy. It would look like a true democracy. Today, by hiding it in inflation, government can get bigger and bigger and bigger. I'll give you a stat. In 2019, if you taxed every U.S. corporation 100%, so if they made no profits at all, you took all of the profits, that's $2.25 trillion. They printed $5 trillion last year. They print another $5 trillion this year. So you can't even touch. Taxes is a red herring. Most of the government revenue comes from inflation, which is a hidden theft. So in other words, and then people bite on taxes all the time because it creates an enemy. How dare those rich people control all of the wealth? We're going to tax them more to be able to get elected. When the exact same thing keeps happening, where most of the revenue comes through inflation, and it's a structural problem. But why would we vote for that? Why would you vote for it? Why I wouldn't? But why would people vote for that? Because they don't see it. They don't see it. What they see is, okay, I get all these services and everything else, and I want more and more. The electorate wants more and more wants more and more all the time. And when governments all over the world can hide giving more without taxing more, it's below our view. So it becomes really easy to have a system that is actually based on a fraud feed back on itself.
Are you saying that the natural state of things without that financial system, basically without central banks, would be deflationary?
100%. 100%. The natural state of the world, human innovation and progress, assuming we don't keep on creating assuming we're learning things and getting better all the time, then that has to be deflationary.
Is there anything bad about deflation?
And this is important, really important, because what people will hear about inflation deflation debate, what they've been programmed to believe is people will buy less and the market will collapse and everything else. And part of that is true. By the way, the whole climate crisis and everything else is caused by inflation. So you cannot stop, so we'll get to that in a second, but climate cannot be solved through an inflationary monetary policy, because an inflationary monetary policy is climate change, because it forces society to buy more and more, drive more and more back and forth. As soon as oil prices start going down because new energy, clean energy, is additive to the energy grid, monetary policy must print money to make oil prices go back up, to make all prices go up. So we're forced on an ever increasing spiral to buy more and more and more and work more and more and more in a manufactured environment that destroys our planet.
Are you basically saying that because there have been inflationary periods and booms that turned out to be fake in the past? Are you basically saying we're in the middle of a 50-year inflationary boom?
Yes. Yes, and so but we don't notice it because technology is moving the other way. So if technology wasn't and you had that much printing, the inflation rate would have skyrocketed.
Where does it show up?
It shows up it shows up in what people are feeling right now, working harder and harder for less and less, and wondering what's wrong. And why are those people over there? How did they get so wealthy? I think the world's richest 50 people gained $1.8 trillion this year.
Yeah, it's in the newspapers all the time, the damn rich people.
So how did that happen? It happened because of the same thing we're talking about. And so when people are wondering why essentially their labor rate is going down, they're working more and more hours, trying to stay on this mouse wheel going faster and faster, they're starting to wake up to what we're talking about. But they don't know the fix yet. They don't know. And so you have one system, you have these two systems colliding against each other. That's really, again, because people measure everything by their daily life. And it's really easy to believe in climate change is caused by because you see it all around you, but you don't connect it to it being caused by inflation.
It is caused by what we do, but we do the things we do because of inflation.
We do the things we do because of inflation. And every rational actor forced through an inflationary policy will do the exact things to try to gain leverage and get out of the system and try to win against a system that's being manipulated faster and faster, because what's really happening is their time. Money is an arbitrary concept. Money is, all it is a trade of your time. We actually don't want more money. We want more time. The money is a placeholder for what we think it will buy us in the future. It'll buy us more time, more vacation, more I can boat, I can get this, I can retire with safety. We trade our time for money, hoping that time will be more valuable later on. So if you arbitrarily with a keystroke distort money, you distort our time. You destroy our time. And so the consequences are really obvious. What will happen next is society is trying to figure out what's happening here, and they're trying to figure out. If you look at through history, if you look at some of the worst sins in humanity, they come as a result of this, and somebody gaining that much control on a population because of this. But it's easy to believe.
So basically, what you're saying is that Christine Lagarde is stealing my time.
Yes.
And Apple, Google, and Microsoft are giving some of it back, because I can talk to you right now without flying over to Canada.
Yeah, and why we're creating these monopolies, and we're voting with our time. That all of this that we're doing right now is free. That it couldn't happen 20 years ago, completely free. And it couldn't happen 20 years ago, and it doesn't show before. If we had to do this 20 years ago, we would have to get on a flight, the cost, all of the jobs of that, and it could only see the people that were at the conference, all of those and everything else. Today, that digital distribution. This interview could go to Africa, it could go all over the world. It's free information. Here's probably a better way to look at it. Things become information becomes free. Mm-hmm. And everything is becoming information.
Do you think that there's this concept of time preference, right? If I have a low time preference, I'm a saver, I keep my money, I consume it later. If I have a high time preference, I just spend it immediately, consume. Do you think that people are predisposed with a time difference?
I think a lot of so if you just look at government policy, if you just, and I'm not trying to insinuate anything here. I'm just saying actually look at the facts. When a government says we have negative interest rates and negative bond yields and everything else, and effectively telling the market we are going to destroy the value of your currency, what would people do?
Well, they start spending it.
They start spending. They start consuming more. They start trying to figure out, how do I get out of this and everything else. So
use speculation. All of these things are natural consequences of that. Put it this way. Let's imagine you're a CEO of a Fortune 500 company, and you know this is happening, and cash on your balance sheet. Let's use an airline for example. Cash on your balance sheet is the worst thing you could have, because you know it's going to lose value. And other CEOs of other competing airlines are investing their shares in cash in buybacks to enrich shareholders, because and you hold cash saving for a rainy day. That would be the normal course of action. And in a rainy day, the person who saved cash would be able to acquire other airlines and everything else, and that same thing would happen personally, and everything else. People saving would over time win, because their cash is worth more. In today's society, it looks exactly the opposite. So what would the rational choice for a CEO to be? Rational choice would be lever. Buy back shares, use leverage to buy back shares. Then rainy day comes, and they go back to the same government, and they say, I have to lay off all these people unless you bail me out. And the government is forced to bail them out because of the same problem that government created in the first place. So you just talked about a dystopian future, basically total control of everything. We know that. So we know that cannot work.
Well, so it can work. It just looks terrible. It can work, and it works in Russia, works in China. It just looks terrible for humanity. And that, by the way, these things happen today. So look what happens to Navalny in Russia. And look what happens in Saudi Arabia to a journalist right? And these things happen today. They happen all over the world today. That's just one isolated incident. It is the normal course of today when power centralizes as much power. It's the normal course. And I often ask myself, why don't enough people stand up? Because if enough people stood up to that, the government would fail the next day, and you would change it. But why people don't stand up to it, or enough people stand up to it, is people seek safety, because standing up to it is so risky for your family, your health, your livelihood, and everything else, that not enough people will stand up to it. Same thing in Nazi Germany, same thing in all over the world. You see the same thing. Not enough people will stand up to that type of power, even though they might know that it's the right thing to do. They're waiting for everybody else to do it. And that's a human nature thing. And so I don't think we're going to change that. We're not going to get more people to stand up to it. Now carry that forward. That's looking at with the lens of history on what happens. Way more people seek safety and hide in the system that looks like that than will stand up against it. And that gives the system way more control to be able to pick off the people that stand up against it. Over and over and over and over again. Now carry that forward where we're going with technology, because artificial intelligence is coming. Artificial intelligence and robotics mean that power consolidates even more, and it consolidates unilaterally. And so if you allow a system to reinforce on itself like this, I suspect no one will be able to stand up against that might.
Yeah, but who is controlling the system? Who are the persons?
So a very few number of people. And when you say Christine Lagarde or other people today, and again, it's easy to turn on those people, I actually don't believe that they actually have done the consequences of the actions on what that'll mean for society. I actually don't believe potentially they're looking near term, and they're worried so much about the collapse of inflation that they're trying to run out of it, and trying to create more and more essentially misinformation to be able to keep the structure in place.
We didn't want to be the pilot when the plane crashes, you know?
Totally. And that's what they're doing. They're doing the same thing that any business does. Look at what Kodak did, even though they invented the digital camera. Look at what Blockbuster in the US did when Netflix provided more for less. And they added candy aisles to their stores, thinking that people wanted to drive to the store to get candy or popcorn with their movies instead of downloading them through Netflix. It's a natural course of action for the system to take a natural set of events to protect the system at all costs. When I look at all the people in the system today, that's what they're doing, for fear of consequences of a total reset. And in that view, now, any system, whether it's a Bitcoin system, whether it's any system, has good and bad actors. And a lot of times in a system that has gone on like this, a lot of people will look like really bad actors at the top. But I'd say most of it is caused by a system reinforcing itself. And those people, and it might be narcissism. It might be,
and incentives, and education.
Exactly. It might be. I need to do this to have domain over other people to be able to help them, without realizing the consequences of those actions on the next step and the next step.
But there was one person who definitely knew what he was doing, and that was Alan Greenspan. We know that he knew what he was doing, and he was the one lowering interest rates after the dot-com bust.
Yeah, and again, so what I mean, but. On all of these things, what alternative? Go back in time, because the system has been a credit-based system for a long time. In 2008, we saw it. I've said this on a number of podcasts, but I had a business that was doing $120 million in revenue at the time, and had letters of credits all over the world, with containers moving all over the world, thousands of containers.
A building business, right?
Yeah, a building supply business, a digital building supply business. And in that time, for 3 days, no counterparty on the other side of the world, even though we had all the money backed for these letters of credit, no counterparty would take our money because they were worried about, not us, they were worried about the bank failing and everything else. So what happened for a 3-day period is the world stopped. Most people didn't notice that because they would never have seen that. And so I knew that TARP and all of these things were coming because what I was just talking about, the unwind, it would just keep on, it accelerate that unwind. And it just, because there's nothing there and everything just stops. And now the money just disintegrates because there was never any money there anyways. It was just credit. And so that cascading unwind created a way to essentially bail out the people that created the problem. And a whole bunch of people got really wealthy through that printing of money. The same people who got wealthy, the banking financial institutions that created the problem, created wealthy, and you destroyed capitalism. But what you're talking about, even Alan Greenspan before that, because it's a mathematical structure that if you allow deflation to happen, which is the natural course of action, it will unwind. And so nothing has changed. The only thing that changed in the entire thing, in fact, again, going back to why I wrote the book, this is coming. Winter is coming. And the only thing that's changed is the amount of, when we think about good deflation, bad deflation, what people are worried about right now is that cascading collapse in deflation, which is a complete reset. Because, and they confuse that with natural progress, disinflation.
Good deflation. That's what we want. More for less.
Exactly. They confuse the two things, but deflation is always happens after a debt bubble that can't be paid back. That you have to go through a cleansing of the system, and you could go through that cleansing of the system. So if you go totalitarian governments, you might not have to go through the cleansing of the system. If you go through war and reset, what ends up happening is you cleanse the system through war and reset, and everything resets. And that's been the typical transition path. And so if you look at all of these things, and that's why I'm sure we're going to talk a little bit about Bitcoin as well, you have to, where we are today in the world, you have to have a transition path from one system to another system. And where technology is leading in the world, in the world, you must, if you don't want door one, totalitarianism, door two, war/reset, you must have a digitally native currency that allows for deflation. So the abundance gained from technology's progress is broadly shared.
When you started writing that book, did you already know about Bitcoin?
I did, but I would say, and still today, I have an open mind. Could it be something else? I have not seen anything, even though I'm open to it. I've not seen it. So my conviction on Bitcoin has only grown since writing the book.
I for a very long time thought it would be gold.
Yeah, and again, through 5,000 years of history, it has always been gold. But that doesn't mean through 5,000 years of history we always rode horses as well, and then we invented cars. And so Bitcoin is again. The gold has some shortcomings, some major shortcomings that allows it to be concentrated and then controlled and taken away. Because you have to store gold, you can't spend a gold bar. It's really hard to. It's centrally stored, and a currency is built on top of it. And then look at 1971. Essentially, U.S. changed the rules of gold because they couldn't pay their debts to France. And they went off the gold reserve, and and if you look back into 1933, same thing happened in the U.S. It's a natural course of history that gold repeats that. Gold was a good store of value, always has been a good store of value, but today Bitcoin is a way better store of value because it's an open monetary network that is decentralized in nature, and nobody can take it from you.
Because it does seem to me that the central banks basically kept the gold as a plan B the whole time. They never talk about it, but they still own it.
Yeah.
And they could go back to something really like a gold standard. It's like a middle way between inflation and actual deflation.
Yeah, and so why I've done a lot of kind of thinking on this topic, thinking could that be a way? And in a short term, if depending on your cycle, if you're invested in gold and everything else, there actually could be some head fakes to gold along the way, and it's not a bad investment from that standpoint. Do I own any personally? No, because I don't believe in its long-term structure. But could governments do exactly what you said? Potentially, but here is the potential. They would have to agree, and you think what's happening, there's less and less trust in the world and more counterparty risk as everybody's trying to find their own way to be able to so essentially you're fracturing societies and you're fracturing states, and they would have to agree to what the reset would look like. And then how much gold does China have? How much gold does US have? Who owns what and everything else? Mm-hmm. To get to that point, I suspect it's not possible without war.
It's all very depressing.
Yeah, and by the way, I'm a super hopeful entrepreneur. I'm hopeful. Is why I wrote the book.
But you do give some hope, and the hope is always connected to deflation. Something I wanted to add is it's interesting. I didn't know if you knew that, but in English we talk about inflation and we talk about price inflation, right? To distinguish between the monetary base, the printing basically, and the effects. In German we have a word. It's called Teuerung, which is basically price inflation. So we started off with the original definition of inflation.
Interesting.
I'm telling you this because I thought about this. We don't have a word for price deflation. We do have one for inflation because we needed that.
Yeah.
And we don't have one for price deflation.
That's interesting.
There's like the third horseman of the apocalypse. He has a scale. And the scale is supposed to be a symbol for famine and inflation. There's also no horseman for deflation.
That's interesting. And Nico, when you talk about these things, it's amazing how language and these things reinforce on each other, and we don't even think about what we don't talk about what we're talking about right now, ever. We just keep on going on our merry way in a system that we know can't survive. And when you investigate, why wouldn't we want things to be less costly? Why wouldn't we want to get more for less all the time? And I think the entire economics establishment and everything else has almost been brainwashed into this narrative without realization that, and maybe for a reason that and I'll get to this in a second, but you had to, on top of gold, because of this because transportation and everything else, you had to build a layer on top, and you had to build extra slack in the system to increase monetary velocity. But on a technology solution that clears every 10 minutes, you actually don't need more slack in the system because it clears every 10 minutes. So you get monetary velocity through technology. And so it's a different way, through Bitcoin. You have a different type of monetary velocity, which allows the abundance gained through technology to be broadly shared. And when you think about this in why wouldn't we want more for less? And how economics is structured. Economics is structured around scarcity, either real or perceived. It's not structured around value. And the oxygen you breathe right now is free. Why is the most valuable thing in your life not the most expensive?
Well, don't tell the government, they might tax it.
Yeah, exactly. But that's the point. Why aren't there way more jobs in air control? And there aren't more jobs there because it's abundant. There's jobs in filling tanks underwater for oxygen because it's scarce there. And so we have our natural state of the world where technology is creating more and more abundance everywhere. It's all around us. Look at your Google Maps. Look at all of the things on your phone that are now free that weren't free before. Abundant, and as they become abundant, it's impossible to charge for those things. And why is it impossible to charge? Because it's a piece of code, and that piece of code can transition everywhere as information becomes free, and more competitors will reach into a market to drive it to free. So we live in that natural state of the world, yet that should be the natural state of the world, as we look, and we're fighting it with everything we have, hurting society as a result.
You don't think that the printing will ever end?
It can't.
Just like that. It will just go on and will just get worse.
So it can't, because of the economic collapse that would happen as a result. And when I say economic collapse, we have to go through that pattern and say, how would it be possible? If you're Christine Lagarde, if you're any of if you're Powell and everything else, what would you do right now? If you signal today that you're coming into Bitcoin, the existing system collapses.
Yeah.
It all starts unwinding. So until the transition path is more tighter. Now, if I were them, I would be driving that door as fast as possible behind the scenes. But realizing that I almost had to keep the pretend game going until the structure was ready, because we're not ready to live in an entirely Bitcoin world today.
No, we're not.
We're not close. We're so early in that inning, and that's actually what also provides the asymmetric bet on the upside of wealth creation on Bitcoin. People that understand that, because most people look at it. Most people take a look at where technology is going, and they don't look through an exponential path on what happens next. Same thing as the internet, and why most people missed what was happening, and all of the value is derived from it today. That network effect, what was created starting in '89 of the internet, we know it. But in '95, '96, if you tried to download a cat picture on the internet, it would have taken a week, right? and most of the value on top of that layer came way later. Google started in, I think, 99 or 2000. Amazon was 95. Facebook was 2006. If you think about all of the value, it was on top of that network effect that it built. And so where are we in Bitcoin? If you equate it to where we are in the internet, in kind of rates of growth, we're in 1996. And most of the value is to come. It's not, but people are thinking about Bitcoin through a lens, the same way that some people looked at the internet in 1995, thinking that it's always going to look like this.
What do you think the central banks are going to do? Are the incentives aligned in a way that they can see Bitcoin like you do as basically a possible solution?
So a system,
or will they just fight it?
They'll fight it. They'll fight it. Some countries will. So some countries, and just because of game theory, are more incented to go early, like what we just saw in El Salvador. I actually didn't predict. I wrote a piece called "The Greatest Game." If any of your listeners are reading it, it's on Medium. But it predicts all of the next steps on what's happening, and it's so far almost exactly what's happening through central bank digital currencies. Why that's a must on the existing system. What'll happen next? And on the other side, I didn't see a country like El Salvador implementing Bitcoin as a payment rail as fast as they did. And why I didn't see that is measured through my lens. in Canada, in a pretty safe society and everything else, I saw Bitcoin winning store of value first, and having a 10x advantage, 10 times advantage over gold in a store of value, and that after store of value, then central banks would peg to it. Then one day, as Bitcoin went higher and higher, it would turn into a currency as well through the second layer in Lightning Network. What I didn't anticipate is that 10 times value, even with something that's as upwardly volatile as Bitcoin, in El Salvador provides 10 times value to their citizens because they're so blocked out of a financial system that even with that price volatility, it's way more valuable than the US dollar or what that looks like. So now you have on Bitcoin the monetary network, kind of the store of value, and layer 2 reinforcing each other faster and faster. Now how many El Salvadors are there versus the G7? And so when you think about now who benefits more becoming earlier on Bitcoin adoption, what you can see really clearly is that at a certain point along this transition, that more and more countries must adopt it, driving the network effect faster and faster and more benefit to all parties on it. And so I suspect that the G7 will be late to the party. I wish that wasn't the case. I'm hopeful that at least they'll move into Bitcoin mining into the, and such, but I suspect they'll be late.
But basically, I mean, have you ever tried going to the street and telling a random person that the 7 most powerful nations in the world will not be able to stop that silly little Bitcoin thing that we've heard on the news from? Because people don't really think about Bitcoin as much as you do.
Yeah, and I have. I spend, I spend a lot of time here thinking through this. But I will tell you this: at the highest orders of all different business, government, everything else, this is being talked about way more than you think. Here's a simple way for your listeners to think about it. Name the last time that a technology that empowered individual rights and freedoms and humanity was stopped. It's never happened.
So maybe we forgot about it.
Maybe we forgot about it, but I can't imagine us forgetting about it. Something that is this pervasive on a network effect that drives it. So printing press would be an example. Printing press gave a lot of information and power and moved it from the church to humanity, and we built more value on top of essentially that information asymmetry that existed in the church to drive a scientific revolution on top of this. It was more minds came in and more information, and then because of the written word was codified, other people could error correct off of that information. So first you have an abundance of more information and a lot of misinformation into that, which was error corrected by the technology and more people. So the technology created more information, and then the technology and more people error corrected the information. Today, that technology that's doing that same thing is in an order of magnitude versus the printing press, probably 20 orders of magnitude different than the printing press, but it's doing the same thing. You have information exploding, and a lot of that information having misinformation. You have actually misinformation in the base of money, which must create more misinformation everywhere else. And you have it being error corrected at a rate as well. And so what you're seeing on Bitcoin is that error correction, and it's happening way faster than most people anticipate.
I don't understand the error correction.
So who used the printing press in the beginning?
I'm supposed to know
Churches.
that. Churches, yes.
Essentially to create, this is the way that you have to live because the church says so. And then what ended up happening, different religions sprung out of the same thing. that created more control over people through this exact same thing. No, my difference, Protestant versus Catholic, tiny little control variations to say this is the way versus this is the way. And a lot of people believing that, but as that printing press drove more information and out, individuals could contribute to that information graph. And sometimes their ideas, Galileo, for instance, and others, contradicted what we observe through the world. They contradicted long-held beliefs, and it was forced to have an answer. And that error correction through people forcing an action, something that has a contradiction, created what I said, science and everything that sits on top of that. That same thing is happening today. And I would say Bitcoin forces an answer to what we're talking about today. The technology, my book, forces an answer to how is inflation congruent with humanity thriving in a technology-driven world.
But is there any way of moving from the old system to the new system that is not horrible?
So Bitcoin is the most hopeful path, but there's going to be a lot of people hurt through this transitions and systems are messy. And why do people get a lot of people that are levering up into the existing system and trying to gain more and more wealth in the existing system and buy more and more houses to be able to, what they're really doing is magnifying their risk to one country. Mm-hmm. Right? So if I bought a whole bunch of houses in one country because I don't realize that and I levered up to be able to do that, and my rents are going higher and all these people are paying higher and higher rents and I'm getting rich and rich as a result, I might not see that when revolution comes to be able to take my housing back, that I might not see that. And then where would I go? Because all my wealth is tied to that one country. Where would I? It's
a fascinating facet of people that they're obsessed with real estate.
Yeah, but so let's dig into that more. I actually think that and this might be a little crazy, but think about this from first principle standpoint. Real estate primarily, our fascination with owning real estate is actually what gives the state its power to be able to create an inflationary environment. Because we think those property rights will last forever, and it's our way of control, and it locks us into one country. And when revolution comes, so look at Lebanon, look at anywhere, look at when the same thing happens. You can't get out. All of your wealth is stored in real estate, and you're locked in forever.
You can very literally also not get out of the system because you're in debt now. You have to go work and pay the house off for 30 years, and then you're too tired.
You're sitting in a system, reinforcing on the system, without the realization of what that system and the benefits to you, the externalities of that system, how that system hurts a whole bunch of other people. Because you're winning in that system, and you're winning more and more. You don't realize that, okay, my rents went up. I have this vast real estate empire, and all the rents went up, which really meant that somebody else's savings, and they're working harder and harder, trying to catch that, and it's impossible to catch it. And at some point, whether government takes your real estate back or taxes it totally different to redistribute it, or all of your time, labor to be able to do that, or these people rise up and steal it back, or take it back through a revolution. You don't even realize it, and you're locked into a system. I often ask myself, because we can see this, everything I'm talking about right now, if you actually zoom out from your own personal spot and look through the lens of the world, you can see it everywhere. The signposts are absolutely everywhere. You'd have to be blind not to see it. So if that's the case, then wouldn't you search for something that is unconfiscatable? That if you remembered 12 words, like in Bitcoin, you could move anywhere in the world with your wealth and everything else, and nobody could take it from you. You could get on a plane. You don't have to take a whole bunch of gold bars on a plane, which you would never be able to do. You can remember 12 words, and you can take your wealth anywhere. And wouldn't it also be probable that jurisdictions around the world, whether they're G7 or not, would compete for that wealth through competition that was building better long-term societies? Because here's the thing. I'm totally fine paying taxes. I'm totally fine. I want a firefighter in my neighborhood. What I don't want is somebody to lie to me. I want integrity. So I want to know where the taxes go, and I want to live in a society where I'm not the wealthiest person and everybody else is living in despair. I'm happy to pay for that, but I want it to be based on truth. I want it to be based on a fraud. And so if you think through logically what's happening in this open monetary network, you're going to have more and more governments that are going to be essentially building to truth over time. And so that's what makes me really hopeful. And
the smartest thing that the governments and the central banks could do were to just let it grow, right?
The smartest thing they could do is they know they're in a system that has to fail, mathematically has to fail. And the smartest thing they could do is let it grow. Even regulation or some sort of and when I say regulation, provide certainty that it is going to grow. Mm-hmm. So and by the way, if current policymakers don't, new policymakers will be elected on a platform that will, because people will demand it.
Do you think that Bitcoin as a movement is already big enough?
Yes, I think it's virtually unstoppable right now. And when I say that, I also want to with the caveat that I might be wrong. But I've done a lot of work on all different possible game theory, different outcomes and everything else. And I hope I'm not wrong, because it provides the best transition path. And it provides a transition path to something that is super hopeful for humanity.
There are two important questions that we still have to cover. First of all, the first question everybody has, just hears about Bitcoin. Why Bitcoin and not one of the 10,000 other coins?
So most of the other coins, and if you use that 10x value creation, Google provides a 10x value over existing media. And what ends up happening is other companies don't see it. So they don't close the loophole as fast, and Google becomes kind of a platform and monopoly power out of that. But if Microsoft saw what Google was early on, remember Google started as free. There was no money there. There's no way to make money. They copied a model called Overture, which was a pay-per-click model that actually gave them all the revenue. But when Google started, it was a free search engine. And so there are a whole bunch of the monopolies dismissed it because it was nothing. Internet wasn't big enough and everything else. There's no way to make money. So it gained enough users and that all of a sudden it turned. And that's what I'm talking about, a 10x type of value. What Bitcoin did, because of the 12-year cycle or whatever we're in right now, is it created an open monetary network that policymakers didn't see for a long time. And it drove a network effect, and more people on that network effect, and created a whole bunch of value for a whole bunch of people on that network effect, and continues to do so now at a crazy rate. And if policymakers saw it in the beginning, all of the same kind of FUD that's happening today would have happened China would have stopped it. The policymakers would have stopped it in the beginning.
Would have happened earlier.
And they could have stopped it at that point. Today, the more they try to stop it, the more they encourage it. So
because they're just, it's a marketing ploy.
Because what's happening is the more that there's, let's use climate change. There's a lot of people believe proof of work leads to, because energy usage increased climate change, and I'd say the vast majority of environmentalists and everything else actually believe that, and I hate to say this, but it's almost a government conspiracy, because inflation equals climate change. And if anybody can tell me why that's wrong, I would love to debate them on it. But an inflationary monetary policy in a finite world guarantees that this world burns. Guaranteed.
Because people spend money and don't think about resources as much if they don't have a place to save their money.
Exactly. It keeps on going and going and going, and it gets exponentially worse. So why climate gets exponentially worse is because of inflation. It's not because of Bitcoin. It's the opposite of what people believe. So the problem is they're looking through an existing system thinking that the system can solve it, and the system cannot solve it. So Bitcoin is actually the most positive thing for the environment, period. But that's not what most people believe. And it's just that belief. It's true, but most people don't believe it. So the more and more energy is trying to stop this. But every time that kind of, when I say more misinformation hits something that's based on truth, more people look at that truth and realize it. So in essence, you're driving Bitcoin's adoption faster and faster and faster with more information. As the monetary layer gets destroyed, more and more people are looking for an alternative, and you're driving that faster. So that's one. Now let's focus on your other coins. So if you saw something gaining that much value and you were an entrepreneur, what you would try to do is create a Me Too type of thing. So you could capitalize on that value. So you see Amazon, and you see early on you saw thousands of clones trying to create Me Too types of companies that could stand out in difference. The only way to stand out in difference is to provide 10 times the value of the leader. So you'd have to same thing that at 10x value in Bitcoin over gold. As a Me Too, you'd have to create a 10x value over Bitcoin to displace Bitcoin. I don't see it at all. I don't see close to it. I see a whole bunch of, and now now some of your listeners might say, okay, well, Yahoo was this, and then Google displaced Yahoo, which is true. Google Play provided a 10x value to Yahoo. And why do I know that? I used both early on. As a marketer, we had to spend $5,000 for an ad space on Yahoo. As a marketer on Google, it was free. We billed to Google, it was free. So it provided a 10x value. But the more important part is that all of those coins, all of those kind of third-party coins, they all become centrally controlled. It looks like so to try to produce that value over Bitcoin, because Bitcoin has this monetary, it doesn't have a marketing team. It doesn't have the people or the marketing team. All of these other coins have marketing teams and everything else. And what they need to do is essentially centralize to be able to try to provide more value. And so I suspect that most of them go to zero in time. That they're not long-term investments. I hope that's true, because I'm not in Bitcoin for money. I'm in Bitcoin for kind of a change in a transition path. But I do also understand that why governments might lean into a different coin that they could control.
Exactly. That's because there's this weird tendency by people who don't understand Bitcoin, haven't put in any work, but also are close to the establishment, politicians, central bankers. They hate Bitcoin, and then they start, shilling other coins.
Yeah.
Because they don't have a problem talking about Ethereum. So basically, what you're saying is that the other coins tend to centralize.
They must.
And decentralization is one of the main advantages of Bitcoin.
Yeah. Yeah, that is.
And the centralization fits much more into our current system.
Yeah, because what they're trying to do is stand out from Bitcoin's value. So, do you believe? And let's go start number one. Do you believe that any of these other coins has a chance to both have the run that Bitcoin had to drive the network effect to be a monetary store of value? Again,
they will tell you they're not trying to be a monetary store of value.
So in other words, what you're saying is Bitcoin has already won the monetary store of value. It's just very early. If they win the monetary store of value, which they've already won, then would it be logical to drive a different coin for all of your purchasing, or would you drive a layer 2 network off of Bitcoin to do your purchasing? And I think it's pretty obvious what's going to happen, and that's what El Salvador just did by coming onto Lightning and network on a purchasing. But while Bitcoin was going after monetary store of value, there was an opening for a whole bunch of NFTs, a whole bunch of other stuff to do. Other kind of Ethereum came out as we're going to be the world's supercomputer, and a whole bunch of other things that Bitcoin wasn't even trying to be.
It was funny because Vitalik Buterin did the Me Too thing.
Yeah.
And now everybody who was with him also does a Me Too thing.
Totally.
Of Ethereum.
But again, that's logical because as gas fees go up on Ethereum, it creates opportunity for other people to do the exact same thing in a race to the bottom. What the most important thing to this conversation is it just confuses a whole bunch of people.
Yes, exactly. That's the main problem.
It's just people talk about cryptocurrencies. There isn't cryptocurrencies. There's Bitcoin. There's a whole bunch of others. And if you wanted to gamble, so I don't personally invest in a whole bunch of gold mining exploration plays, whereby you could actually make a lot of money there if you were the right one early and everything else and got out at the right time. Most of them are stock plays, but there's a couple that aren't. In the whole altcoin space, I see a whole bunch of gambling, and so if somebody's time preference and they want to gamble with their money and everything else, I do understand why they might be there, and if they are in earlier, what gives them more knowledge in something than somebody else. So I understand why people are doing it, but they can get just killed. And because they don't understand the principles driving it. And I'm personally looking at way longer term plays, and what I believe in that has kind of asymmetric bet upside.
What about central bank digital currencies?
They're coming.
What does that mean?
So what it means, the ECB put out today, from my book that I wrote about one of the working papers that talks about central bank digital currencies, and as a reason bringing them out so you could take negative interest rates to -6 and essentially tax people on their savings. Because if you did that today, people would hold cash. And so if you take interest rates too far negative, people would take their money out of the bank and they would cause a bank run because people would hold cash underneath their mattress. So governments cannot go way negative in rates without people moving to cash. A central bank digital currency changes that they can take your money with a keystroke. They can change the rules instantly and all your savings could be gone. Whether they would in the beginning, not who knows, and everything else. But again, against an unstable system, that must happen over time. It must get worse and worse and worse, and all of the other consequences we talked about must get worse and worse as a result of that. But are they coming? They are absolutely coming.
Don't you think they are rushing it?
Yeah,
It feels to me they're rushing it.
Because you have Bitcoin, that's an open monetary standard. We're operating on a network effect and a whole ecosystem building on it that is forcing their hand, and they're trying to gain the upper hand. But yes, they're rushing it, but it doesn't matter because the structure of what they're rushing is it cannot work anyways. Well, it can work. It can concentrate all power and control in a few number hands. If you believe
there's a funny thing happening. The bankers I talked to, they were never nervous about Bitcoin, but they're nervous about central bank digital currencies. They don't like it.
I wrote about that because it removes the need for a bank. The banks have been the greatest beneficiary of printing, the greatest. The banks are given a one-way bet. Heads I win, tails I win. I can make a bet that everything would fail. I can lever up and everything else, and everything would fail. And if I make that bet and I make way more money, and things start to fail, government comes in and recapitalizes me. That's the way so we don't have a system that looks like a free market. We have a crony cap. The entire system is based on crony capitalism, with the banks at the very top of the ladder that have been the most enriched by that system. Now, the central but it required because you had central banks that were supposed to have independence from government. But now government and central banks are really close together, right? Because they have to be. And what ends up happening through is so the central bank would print a bunch of money, give it to the banks, and the banks would distribute it. Well, that's not happening fast enough. Banks won't make those loans because they're too risky. So you have M2 collapsing in the real market because there's not enough of an economy, so the monetary velocity isn't getting out there. So the central bank has to step into the bank's position through a central bank digital currency, and that means the banks essentially, this is going to sound bad, but it's true, time at the trough is coming to an end. They're not needed.
The more you centralize the system, the less people profit.
That's what ends up happening, and that's why the path is really clear to very few people in control of the whole thing. And so now you have banks who were long since fighting Bitcoin, who are now coming onto Bitcoin because they can start to project what happens next without it. So some of your strongest people that were fighting it are turning into advocates, because they realize that without it, the free market dies.
Is it still alive somewhere?
Which?
The free market?
Not really. So the closest we have to a free market is in Bitcoin, and that's actually what brings on the high volatility rate too. But even if you use Bitcoin as a free market, when the entire market is being misallocated like it is with printing money, then it's hard to say anything is a free market.
Well, I agree, but most people, I would ask, here in Austria would tell you that we're basically living through Somalia. Basically, there's no state, everybody for themselves, turbo capitalism.
Yeah, so it isn't. It's not. So that's created. That's created by manipulating people's time and money, because money is just an arbitrary concept. And so when somebody if you believe in inflation, you also believe that inflation is required against everything we've just talked about. You also believe that somebody should control you.
Lots of people do that.
Somebody
actually,
some of the top of the ladder who could change their mind with a keystroke should control all of everything you do. And if you believe in that, that's fine. I just don't believe in that.
I don't either, but many people do.
Yeah,
the system is already so fine-tuned that people want to be controlled in a way. They want to be told what to do,
or they don't know, or they just don't know. So this conversation that we're having brings us into awareness for a bunch more people. Some of those people that we're bringing this into awareness will first push back against the things because it's so different than they've always believed. Change like this is radical. And again, it's not programmed in their mind. It's not something they think about every day. They don't think about an entire economic system and how that would reinforce and cause all this chaos. They don't need to think about that every day. They trust in a system and then build everything they do on top of that system. So when you have the base layer of a system crumbling, people are confused. And what will they do typically when they're confused or fearful of a system? They'll go into the system deeper to trust somebody to fix it for them without going through what we're talking about it.
And they will make this easy because there will be a central bank digital currency, and then there will be universal basic income, right? And because you said people love the inflation. We want to get the money. We want to feel like we're getting richer, and that will be a way.
They don't love the inflation. They don't go through this thought experiment to get to it. What they do is I use this monopoly example, and so it's probably for people that don't see what we're talking about. Here's what that looks like. If you go around a game board on Monopoly and you play with 4 friends and you are lucky enough to land on the right things the first 3 times around the board and you go around it pretty quickly, then you gain an upper hand over others who go to jail, landed on free parking and everything else. Just because of the luck of the roll of the dice, you gained an advantage that reinforces on itself. As you put more houses on the properties and everything else, your advantage reinforces itself, and their disadvantage reinforces on itself. So you have 2 systems reinforcing on themselves, and you go around the game until somebody has no more money or somebody has all the money.
Jeff, thank you so much for this talk. It's tonight in Vienna and the morning in Canada, I think, where you're sitting.
Yep.
Maybe as a last question, give us your vision for the next couple of years. What's going to happen in the so-called old system and what's going to happen in the new system?
The old system is going to continue to, it must continue to print and it must continue to centralize, and more of the free market will be pushed into government spending and policy. And that's going to create a whole bunch of geopolitical risk and tension around the world, and essentially that system is going to be fighting for its last breath by continuing to do the same thing to reinforce that system. I wish what I just said wasn't true, but it's a mathematical certainty. So that's what's going to happen, and that is likely to create a whole bunch of pain for people, and a whole bunch of us versus them. Well, most people are focusing on a derivative of the root cause. So they're focusing on the leaves instead of the root. But those things that they think are important are going to turn them against other people at an ever-increasing rate. So that is all these are likelihoods out of the existing system, and that's probably what happens on the existing system. At the same time, you might have policymakers talk about how do we transition, a great reset. So you're going to have a whole bunch of things trying to the existing system to maintain its influence and power. Well, a new system is emerging, and that new system, I believe, is Bitcoin. And when I say I believe it's Bitcoin, and I hope it's Bitcoin, because it provides the best transition path from one place to another. So Bitcoin should materially increase. It's going to be volatile along the way, but even if you don't believe that, you should have some as an insurance policy in case I'm right. But the entire network effect and what ends up happening on Bitcoin is going to move faster and faster at the same pace, is the same rate as kind of the other one is disintegrating. My hope is that needle can be thread in a way that provides the best possible path for humanity to make this transition, and the people that are the people that are helping build this transition are early enough. And actually, a lot of people most hurt by the existing system will most benefit from Bitcoin. If you just said,
But they don't know that, right?
know that. But that's actually why I talked on these podcasts. Remember that this is something that I just volunteer. I volunteer my time to be able to do this. I'm not trying to make any money from this whole all of this work that I do. I'm trying to get more people engaged in something that has a huge importance into their life, and their kids' lives and everything else. And so, or at least to look deeper into what we're talking about. Because you're right, the most hurt by this, most hurt by the existing system, believe the most in the existing system. And but that actually gives me hope too, because if you just think 21 million Bitcoin, and there's 46 million multimillionaires, and there's about 2,000 billionaires in the world, there is not enough Bitcoin that the existing establishment could have that much power, or Bitcoin is going to be broadly distributed, and people are going to be, individuals are going to be having more say in the financial institutions of the future.
But what about, the Bitcoin whales of today? They will turn into the most fabulously rich people ever to live.
So it's an interesting thing that people talk about that and say, and that might, and why that might be a reason not to do it. It's like saying, that's like me saying, I wouldn't invest in Amazon at $5 because Jeff Bezos would be richer than me. Makes no sense.
It makes no sense.
It makes no it makes no sense. But even if you carry that forward and you say, okay, and remember what's happening, I keep going back to this, but we measure a system today and we measure the new system through the lens of today, and instead of what it would look like. Just imagine in that future that somebody has a whole bunch of wealth on a Bitcoin standard and it look like a Bitcoin standard. The only way they can gain more wealth in that standard is to provide more value to you. If they try to gain control by hiring more and more people to gain control, or creating a war machine to create control, they distribute their Bitcoin by doing so. It fixes the incentive structure. It changes the incentive structure. It doesn't bring equality because people aren't equal. Sometimes the skill set is more valuable. Today, AI researchers' skill set is more valuable than a berry picker. It doesn't change equality. It changes fairness. And so bringing fair rules and the right incentive structure ensures that if we're delivering more value to society, we would get paid more. If we're not, but all prices keep following along that axis from a free market working. And if you tried to exhibit control through that, you're distributing Bitcoin by creating control.
Jeff, one last question. We started with deflation and we're going to end with deflation. The fallacy that deflation is bad because people will not spend their money. How do you destroy that? How do you answer to that?
Really simply, do you buy a phone even though you know the next year is going to give you more? Of course you do. Do you buy food even though if you waited, food might go down in price? Of course you do. There's a whole bunch of things. There's a whole bunch of economic calculations that you decide to buy every day that even though they're cheaper in the future, you'll still buy. It makes no sense that people believe that unilaterally. All it does is take away wasteful spending.
The stuff we don't actually need.
The stuff you don't need. It just takes away wasteful spending, which and that's what the irony is. People that believe in climate change can be solved through an inflationary system that causes climate change. The irony is they don't understand that point that I just said. It's just waste. Most of it is just waste. And more so, the technology today is such a path as things turn into information, and information is free. You get the abundance without the things. Like look at your phone. Look at all the things that are abundant today that you used to pay for. You have unlimited. You have unlimited. I used to buy a whole bunch of maps every time I went on a road trip. I don't do that anymore. I have an unlimited information. The map became information. The information became free.
But that's also the reason why the system is working still.
That's right.
Because I pay ever more for basically for my apartment, but I don't really have to buy any other stuff.
That's right. And food you're paying ever more for, and you're
Yeah.
driving a system that is essentially less things that you can charge more for as technology is embedded into more things, is taking away the requirement of those things. That's what's happening.
They built a 3D printed house in Germany
Well,
with all the regulations. And that's why I'm saying Germany, because they have the strictest building regulations in the world.
yeah. And again, all of these things, I think if you think about, I'll use the example of a chair because Christine Lagarde thinks inflation will stop buying chairs, and then the economies collapse. So use an example of a chair. What is a chair? It's information. How do you create that chair? Somebody's mind had an idea for a chair. And that to reach economic value, that idea for their chair, that design of the chair must work in the market. It must provide more value to more people for that chair to be produced. How do they do that? Hey, what about this? I have this idea for this chair. It's a unique chair and everything else that I have this idea for a chair. I'm going to test market that, whole bunch of people, markets and everything else. Hey, retail stores, would you buy this chair if I could produce it for this? Great. Now I go produce it, I send it to China. Whole bunch more jobs, whole bunch of everything else. Just on information that was in my mind on a chair that is now produced, shipped overseas, put in distribution between distribution, warehouse, and store. So somebody could drive to the store to look around at all the chairs and say, I like that one, drive back with their chair. Just came from information. The entire job, entire structures, all of the jobs combined to be able to that information. Within 10 years, might be even faster, that information will move into a digital printer, and you'll be able to print your chair in your region. Might be faster than 10 years. And the entire supply chain and all of those jobs of all of that information moving to produce things changes radically, and it reduces costs. The next step of that is that information, your idea, is embedded with artificial intelligence, and you have unlimited designs, unlimited information of chairs that can be produced instantaneously for almost free. Our entire system is being redesigned to an information-led system, and there's nothing that the government can do to stop it. It'll accelerate.
So we're going from a system where we print nothing but too much money to a system where we can print everything but no money.
Exactly. So what you have is abundance in money, scarcity in everything else. So abundance is somebody choosing how much money they can print, creates scarcity everywhere else, or scarcity in money creates abundance everywhere else. That's the choice we live in. And Bitcoin is one choice, and the existing system is the other choice.
That's a lot to unpack there.
But it is true. That's what's happening.
You know, when you talk about abundance, people think you're Karl Marx.
And I don't think that way at all. I think 100% free market. I think, or when I say a free market with checks and balances to be able to make sure, but with where truth reigns supreme, where integrity and truth matters. That's what I think. And I don't think. I think Karl Marx had it wrong, and why I think that is because he missed the human condition. Humans are, and if you miss the human condition, we need to take humans out of the loop of monetary policy, and trust math and code, because humans can be corrupted.
So this is one thing that the computers actually do better.
They do it
than the people.
Because it's like, can you imagine thinking today that you could know more information then all of the information that's and setting policy to drive every economic calculation downstream is that ludicrous? Is it, how arrogant is it to think that you could look backwards? Essentially, you're running an economy for the future, driving 90 miles an hour through your rearview mirror. You're driving it off a cliff.
And we've known that prices are an information system for decades, but we're still messing with them.
We're messing with them because of human greed and arrogance, unfortunately. And the world is changing, and again, that human greed and arrogance is turning into is reinforcing what's happening, and you're seeing more and more people opt out of the system.
And that is what gives you hope and optimism.
That's what gives me hope and optimism, because on the other side of this transition, you have something that looks, and this is that you have something that looks way more like Star Trek than Star Wars.
That's a very good point to end on. I wanted to end on something positive. Let's go with Star Trek.
Yeah.
Jeff, thank you very much. Your book, The Price of Tomorrow, in German, Der Preis der Zukunft, it's just been published in Germany, Austria, and Switzerland. Apricot Verlag. I think you can get it everywhere, starting with Amazon. Do you want to give us one last message? Where can we follow you?
Best for me is just at Jeff Booth on Twitter. Again, my core thing is I'm an entrepreneur, technology businesses and everything else. This just happens to be a passion because I care about the world in which my kids grow up.
I do too. Thank you so much, Jeff.
Thanks very much.